In 2024, the price of the world's chocolate did something it had never done before. The raw cocoa bean crossed $10,000 a ton for the first time in recorded history, and at its peak, climbed close to $13,000. In about a year, cocoa roughly tripled in price. And the whole thing traces back to just two countries, sitting side by side on the coast of West Africa, that between them grow close to 2/3 of all the cocoa on Earth. Three numbers explain it. This is the chocolate crisis, told entirely in data. To see how extraordinary that move really is, look at the long view. For an entire decade, cocoa was a quiet, unglamorous commodity. Its yearly average price drifted between roughly $2,000 and $3,000 a ton, year after year, and almost nothing happened. In 2023, it still averaged around $3,200. Then came 2024. The annual average jumped to over $7,000, more than doubling in a single year. And on the worst days, the daily price spiked far higher still. After 10 flat years, the line on the chart simply went vertical. Here is the milestone that made headlines around the world. In March of 2024, cocoa crossed $10,000 a ton, a level it had never reached in the entire recorded history of the crop. And it did not stop there. As the year went on, the daily price kept climbing, pushing close to $13,000 at its peak, before ending the year around $11,500. For a bean that had spent the previous decade sitting near $3,000, a price near $13,000 is an almost unimaginable move. Put it as simply as possible. In about a year, the price of the world's chocolate roughly tripled. It did not happen because everyone suddenly started eating far more chocolate, and it was not driven by ordinary inflation. Something went badly wrong on the supply side, the growing of the beans themselves. And the cause, it turns out, is remarkably concentrated in just two countries. It starts with a single country. On the West African coast, Côte d'Ivoire alone grows about 40% of all the cocoa on Earth, 4 out of every 10 beans from one nation. And just to its east sits Ghana, the world's number 2. Almost the entire global crop is squeezed into this one narrow tropical band of West Africa. So when the weather turns, or disease spreads through the trees here, there is simply no other region big enough anywhere else to cover the gap. Just how concentrated is it? Between them, Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana grow close to 2/3 of all the cocoa on the planet. Côte d'Ivoire alone accounts for about 40% of world production, a single country supplying roughly 4 out of every 10 cocoa beans on Earth. Ecuador, Cameroon, Nigeria, and a handful of smaller growers split most of what is left. No major crop in the world leans on so few farmers, packed into so small an area. That concentration is the hidden risk underneath every chocolate bar. And in the 2023 to 24 season, that small, crucial region had a genuinely terrible harvest. Global cocoa production fell about 13% in a single year, according to the International Cocoa Organization, one of the steepest one-year drops on record. The world simply grew far less cocoa than it had the year before. And because the crop is so concentrated, there was no other region anywhere near large enough to step in and quietly make up the difference. In raw numbers, world cocoa production fell from just over 5 million tons to under 4.5, a drop of more than 600,000 tons in 12 months. That missing cocoa, more than 500,000 tons of it, is essentially the entire story of why the price exploded the way it did. In a market that was already stretched tight, with very little spare supply, even a shortfall of a few percent ends up going a very, very long way. And the pain was not shared evenly between the two countries. Ghana, the world's second-largest cocoa producer, saw its crop collapse by about 27% in a single season, falling from roughly 650,000 tons down to 480,000. That is more than a quarter of its output, gone in 1 year. When the world's number 2 supplier loses that much that fast, the global market has almost no way left to cushion the blow. So what actually went wrong out on the farms? Reports from the season point to 3 separate forces hitting all at the same time. Unusual weather, unusually heavy rains, followed by hot, dry seasonal winds. Plant disease, swollen shoot virus, and black pod rot spreading through the trees. And an aging stock of cocoa trees, many of them well past their most productive years. On its own, Each of these is something farmers can manage. Arriving together, in the same two countries, in the same season, they broke the harvest. And here is the deeper lesson, hiding inside that vertical price chart. Because so much of the world's cocoa comes from one small region, a local set of problems could never possibly stay local. A single bad growing season in one corner of West Africa instantly became a price shock for every chocolate maker and every chocolate eater on the entire planet. That is what extreme concentration does. The failed harvest left the market dangerously thin. For the 2023 to 24 season, the world ran a cocoa production deficit of more than 460,000 tons. It used far more than it grew. And global cocoa stockpiles, the buffer that is supposed to smooth out exactly these bad years, fell to their lowest level in roughly 45 years. So when the harvest failed, there was almost no cushion left anywhere in the system to absorb the shock. The price had nowhere to go but up. Now here is the part that genuinely surprises almost everyone. While the raw cocoa bean was tripling in price, the chocolate bar sitting on the shop shelf barely moved at all. Compare the two directly, across 2022 to 2024. The cocoa bean, up more than 200%. Retail chocolate, measured by the official consumer price index, up under 13%. So how on earth can the single main ingredient triple in price, while the finished product it goes into stays almost completely flat? The answer is that the cocoa bean is only a tiny slice of what you actually pay at the till. Break a chocolate bar's price down into the value captured at each stage along the chain, and you find that most of it sits very far from the farm. Manufacturers and retailers, the big brands and the shops that sell to you, take the clear majority of the value. Trade and processing take another solid chunk. And the cocoa itself? It turns out to be a surprisingly thin sliver of the total. How thin exactly? According to the Cocoa Barometer, the farmer who actually grows the cocoa captures only around 6 to 7% of the value of a finished chocolate bar. 6 or 7 cents on every dollar you spend. So the people who are most exposed to the failed harvest, to the plant disease, and to the bad weather are the very same people sitting right at the bottom of the long, profitable chain that their crop alone makes possible. And there is a final, painful twist to the farmer's side of this story. In both Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, cocoa growers are paid a fixed farm gate price, set by a national regulator at the very start of each season. So when the world price suddenly exploded to records in 2024, a huge share of the farmers were already locked into the old, far lower price. The historic, once-in-a-generation windfall largely sailed straight over their heads and into the market above them. And this exact shape is not unique to chocolate at all. Coffee tells almost precisely the same story. Detailed studies of the coffee chain found that most of the value is added only after the bean has left the farm, in the washing, the processing, and the export. At the farm gate, the premium a grower earns is small. By the time that same coffee is exported, the value added has nearly doubled. A different crop entirely, but an identical pattern. The real value is created downstream, far away from the person who grew it. Step back from cocoa, and you realize it is just one example of a much broader fragility running through the global economy. Look at how many everyday materials lean on a single country. More than 3/4 of all the world's mined cobalt, essential for batteries, comes from just one nation. Around 40% of the world's vanilla and roughly 1/3 of its natural rubber each come from a single country too. Concentration like this makes a supply chain cheap and efficient to run, but it also makes it dangerously brittle. So what does all of this actually mean for you? Standing at the supermarket checkout, the record bean price reaches your shelf slowly, with a lag of many months. But make no mistake, it does reach it. Retail chocolate prices already rose almost 13% across 2022 to 24, and then kept right on climbing afterward as old supply contracts expired and the record cocoa price finally fully worked its way into the bar of chocolate sitting in your hand. So here is the entire chocolate crisis, captured in just 3 numbers. A cocoa bean that crossed $10,000 a ton for the very first time in history, close to 2/3 of the whole world's supply, riding on just 2 neighboring countries. And a farmer who, after everything, captures only about 6% of the bar you finally buy. One bad harvest, in one small region, priced by the entire planet. In the end, It is a powerful reminder of just how concentrated and how fragile the everyday things we take completely for granted really are. Your chocolate bar depends on two countries, on one short stretch of West African coastline, and on a single growing season going right. And when that one harvest fails, the whole world ends up tasting it.